They said her lawn was too messy, her paint color was too bold, her presence didn't fit the neighborhood. At first, it sounded like ordinary HOA complaints, but it wasn't. Beneath the rules and letters was something darker, something aimed not at her house, but at her. What began as small warnings soon turned into public humiliation, threats, and an ultimatum that could cost her everything. But what the HOA never expected was how quickly the tables would turn. Because sometimes, the very people you try to silence are the ones who hold the most power. For years, Angela believed she had finally found peace. After years of saving and working double shifts, she bought her dream home in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Tree-lined streets, neatly trimmed hedges, and a sense of security she thought she had earned. To her, this house wasn't just property. It was proof of resilience, sacrifice, and pride. Every morning she tended to her garden, waved to passing neighbors, and walked her dog along the same sidewalks as everyone else. At first, the community seemed polite, even welcoming. A smile here, a nod there. Angela thought she had truly become part of something safe. But it didn't take long for the cracks to show. Subtle stares lingered a little too long. Whispered conversations paused when she walked by. Letters from the HOA arrived in her mailbox. Small complaints at first about lawn length, trash bins, or paint shades. Things her neighbors seemed to ignore without consequence. Angela brushed it off, telling herself it was normal HOA nitpicking. But deep down, she felt the unease building. Why her? Why so soon after moving in? She didn't know it yet, but those minor notices were just the beginning of a storm that would shake the entire neighborhood and expose the truth no one wanted to admit. The letters didn't stop. Week after week, Angela found another neatly folded notice from the HOA stuffed into her mailbox. First, it was the color of her shutters, apparently too untraditional. Then it was her flower beds, called unsightly, despite the fact that her neighbor's yard was cluttered with overgrown weeds left untouched. Each complaint carried the same sharp undertone. She didn't belong. At first, Angela tried to comply. She repainted, she trimmed, she adjusted. But no matter how many corrections she made, the notices grew harsher. Soon, the warnings turned into threats of fines. Fines that ballooned into thousands of dollars over petty accusations no one else seemed to face. The neighborhood began to feel different. Neighbors who once nodded at her now looked away. Conversations went silent when she approached. One morning, she noticed a group of board members huddled at the end of her driveway, pointing at her home as if it were a crime scene. They didn't even try to hide it. Angela began keeping a folder, each letter, each notice, each fine. She knew something wasn't right, and deep down she felt it wasn't about rules at all. It was about her. The message was loud but unspoken. She was not wanted here. The harassment escalated. A notice claimed her grass was half an inch too long, despite being freshly cut. Another accused her of disturbing the peace for hosting a small family cookout, while her neighbors threw noisy parties without consequence. Then came the most humiliating strike, a formal violation letter accusing her of bringing down property values. The words burned as she read them, the implication clear. It wasn't her house lowering value, it was her presence. Angela felt cornered. Nights became restless, her stomach tightening with every creak outside. One morning, she found a flyer taped to her door, a reminder of the upcoming HOA meeting where her case would be addressed. It felt less like a meeting and more like a trial. The day arrived. She walked into the crowded room, folder clutched in her hands, heart racing. The faces staring back at her weren't neutral. They were cold, calculating, waiting. One by one, the board members listed her so-called violations, their words sharp and rehearsed. Angela tried to defend herself, laying out her records, pointing to the obvious double standards. But the room wasn't listening. It wasn't about rules anymore, it was about control. And just when she thought it couldn't get worse, the board issued its final blow. If she didn't comply, they would move to place a lien on her property, threatening to take the very home she had worked her whole life to earn. Angela's knees felt weak. The walls seemed to close in. And in that moment, she realized this was no longer about fines, no longer about flowers or shutters. This was about erasing her voice, her presence, her place in the neighborhood. But what the HOA didn't know was that Angela was not as powerless as they thought. The HOA meeting reached its peak like a courtroom without justice. Angela stood at the front, folder in hand, her evidence neatly organized. She showed photos of her trimmed lawn, receipts of her repairs, proof that her house was maintained to the same, or better, standards as everyone else's. But every time she spoke, the board interrupted. Every time she presented proof, they dismissed it. The crowd wasn't nodding in support. They were whispering, smirking, exchanging looks that told her this was already decided. Then came the moment that cut deeper than all the notices combined. A board member leaned forward, cleared his throat, and said, "This neighborhood has standards. We don't want properties or people that bring it down." The words hung heavy in the air. Gasps rippled through the room, but no one spoke against it. Angela felt her heart slam in her chest, her breath shallow. It wasn't even coded anymore, it was out in the open. The chairperson picked up a gavel and announced the vote. One by one, hands went up around the room, approving fines so high they could strip her of her home. Angela's body trembled, not from fear alone, but from rage. Rage at being silenced in a place she rightfully belonged. Rage at being told she was unworthy of the very dream she had sacrificed for. For a split second, she felt the crushing weight of defeat. The threat was real. Lose everything or keep fighting against a system built to push her out. The walls of the HOA meeting room weren't just closing in, they were suffocating her future. But deep inside, something shifted. Angela realized she wasn't just defending her lawn or her shutters. She was defending her dignity, her right to exist without apology. And the HOA had no idea just how prepared she was to fight back. Angela walked out of that HOA meeting shaken, but not broken. What the board didn't know was that her folder held more than proof of compliance. It held every letter, every biased notice, and even recordings of conversations where board members revealed their true intentions. Within days, Angela filed a formal complaint and brought her case to legal authorities. The same HOA that had tried to strip her of her dignity now found itself under investigation. News spread quickly. Local reporters covered her story. Neighbors who had once stayed silent now spoke up, and the same community that tried to erase her was forced to reckon with the truth. The fines were dropped, the threats dismissed, and board members faced consequences for discriminatory practices. For Angela, it wasn't just about keeping her home. It was about proving that silence only fuels injustice, and that sometimes the most powerful resistance is refusing to be erased. She still walked her dog every morning, still tended to her garden, but now she did so with her head held higher than ever. Her home remained hers, not just in name but in principle, but the impact reached beyond her street. Her story echoed a reality many face in neighborhoods, schools, and workplaces across the country, where rules become weapons and bias hides behind policy. Angela's fight was not just her own. It was a mirror held up to a system that too often punishes people not for what they do, but for who they are. So the question remains, how many more Angelas will have to fight just to live in peace? And when will communities stop building walls of exclusion and start planting seeds of justice instead? If you believe in equality, share this story, because the more we speak up, the harder it becomes for injustice to stay hidden.